Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be bringing back the Motorsport What If series with a question: what if Gilles Villeneuve did not die in his crash at Zolder in 1982, or didn't have that crash at all? Now in our timeline, Gilles Villeneuve died in an accident and qualifying at Zolder in 1982 whilst trying to beat his teammate Didier Pironi. Gilles, in his day, was one of the best F1 drivers on the grid, and had he not been given terrible equipment, he would have easily won championships left, right, and centre. Now, of course, Gilles did have a championship-winning car in 1979, but that car was followed up with a lackluster car in 1980 and 1981. At the time of Gilles' death, he was in fact embroiled in a championship fight with his teammate and could have possibly have won the championship had he survived that season. Whilst Keke is fully deserving of his 1982 championship, it wasn't completely down to his skill. He only won one race, and quite frankly, the only reason why he was in the championship hunt in the first place was because of Ferrari's complete implosion during the season. Not just with the death of Gilles Villeneuve, but with Didier Pironi's career-ending crash a few weekends later. So now, let's get into theory. Let's imagine an alternate timeline where Gilles Villeneuve did not die at Zolder and completed the 1982 season. And given the fact that Ferrari was the best team in 1982, that won the Constructors' Championship, and the car was actually quite fast, I think Gilles Villeneuve would have been 1982 champion had he survived. Now, 1983 is where this gets interesting, because in 1982, McLaren offered Gilles a contract for the next season. Gilles didn't sign it, but had he survived, it would most likely be a possibility that he would have signed for McLaren. Given the state of Ferrari at that point, I do think Gilles, in the ensuing weekends after Imola, I do think he would have signed for McLaren later on in the season for 1983. His first season back at McLaren would not warrant a world championship though, as Brabham was simply too good that year. But 1984 would be a real possibility for Gilles. Given the fact that he was more experienced than Alain Prost, and less cautious than Alain Prost, I do think Gilles Villeneuve would have beaten Niki Lauda that season. Speaking of the Professor, let's talk about Alain Prost in this scenario, because he's the man who loses the most out of this. In our original timeline, Prost moves from Renault to McLaren, but with Gilles alive, Gilles takes his place at McLaren. Whilst Prost does challenge for the 1983 championship, his comments on the lack of development on next year's car causes Renault to sack him. And because Gilles is in his McLaren seat, he does not move to McLaren in 1984. So where does he go? It's most likely that Prost would have signed for Ferrari for the 1984 season, given that they finished second place in the Constructors in 1984 and in 1985, and so therefore he would have had a decent car to try and contend for wins and potentially championships. But by 1986, with the retirement of Niki Lauda, the McLaren seat is open, and so therefore McLaren sign Alain Prost. Gilles at this time would have racked up another championship in 1985, but he would be reaching the end of his career. Now, in terms of the 1986 championship, it could go either way. Gilles could have won it, Prost could have won it, anyone could have won it, really. So, post in the comments down below, who do you think would have won that championship? Now, considering the fact that some 1977 rookies retired around this stage, I do think it is perfectly reasonable to suggest that Gilles Villeneuve would retire in 1987. He wouldn't have gone out with the championship as Williams in 1987 were absolutely dominant. It was only Mansell and Piquet for the championship that year, and so at best he would have finished third place in the championship. With Villeneuve's retirement, this would lead to Senna taking the McLaren spot, and starting the Senna-Prost rivalry. And essentially, the last bit of the 1980s is akin to our timeline. Gilles will retire with 3 or 4 world championships. One in 1982, one in 1984, one in 1985, and if he was lucky, one in 1986. If there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's this. Gilles Villeneuve was really as good as they say, and this video shows just how bad his death was, because had he lived, he would have changed the course of Formula 1 in the 80s. Niki Lauda would not win a third world championship. Alain Prost's rise to the top of Formula 1 would be 2 years later, and his incredible potential would finally be realised. Unfortunately, that is not the timeline which we live in, and Gilles' life was tragically cut short, and we never got to see just how good he could become. And with that, I will end this video. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.